So one of the things that I really want to bring to these videos is showing you how to make meals from the things that you already have on hand, or perhaps even things that you find reduced in the grocery store. So oftentimes produce is on the discount rack and it's really for pennies on the dollar, and you can make a good meal out of it. But sometimes just what happens is that produce, especially in the summer months, gets pushed to the back of the refrigerator. And there's some things that we can do to revitalize these and still make a good meal. I'm going to show you how to make a stuffed cabbage. Rather than taking the time to have the cabbage leaves individually rolled, we're going to layer them. In most of the recipes that I show you, or the food preparation that I show you, I'm going to show it with a vegan option. When you're cooking rice, it's important that you always rinse it well. Rice is something that if you have on hand, you can use it as a base for so many meals. Generally, when I'm cooking rice in a rice cooker, I am using 1 part rice and 2 parts water. If you have leftover rice at the end of the meal, you can certainly microwave it and use it for leftovers the next day, or you can add it to soups or make a rice pudding. It's really nice to have a rice cooker. So this is a green cabbage, and you want to take the larger leaves off. First, you want to take off any that might not be usable. Even the ones that you might not want to use for this dish, you can set aside, and at the end of the week, use those little trims of vegetables and make a broth. That works for just about every vegetable with the exception of beets. If you use beets, of course, you're going to end up with a red broth, and that's not aesthetically pleasing. Peel the larger leaves off the cabbage. This takes a good amount of time, but again, by layering this dish rather than individually rolling the leaves, we'll be saving some time. If your cabbage looks a little spent and it needs to be revitalized, just about every vegetable can be brought back by rinsing it in cold water or soaking it with a little salted water with a little white vinegar. So once you've prepared your cabbage leaves and have enough that you think you'll be able to make enough to fill your family, you can put them on the stovetop and with just a little bit of water and salt, cook them until they're tender. I'm hoping that through these videos, you'll be able to look in your refrigerator and have these connections made of different ideas that you can do with things that you might otherwise discard. So here I have some leftover beet greens. I'd already cooked the roots for a salad earlier in the week, and the greens are really wonderful sources of nutrition, and they're quite flavorful. So trimming off the stalky ends and setting them aside, you can just dice up the beet greens and add them to the rice and use that as part of the filler. They'll all saute down nicely. You don't need to be very precise. Any little pieces that have kind of gone by, you can set aside. But again, don't be afraid of using vegetables that don't look perfect. Poverty is a wonderful teacher. I had 5 children and very little income at one point in my life, and I really learned to make do with what I had. And I believe the one place where you can make the biggest savings in your family's budget is in that grocery bill. your mortgage or your rent stays steady, energy prices just keep going up, and food prices go up as well. So we need to get a little inventive, a little creative, and still provide our family with really nutritious, wholesome foods. Those onion skins, when you peel them off, they can also be added to your stockpile. They'll add a little golden color to the broth that you make at the end of the week. I am at a place in my life now where I have a little bit more time than I did before. But if you are busy working outside the home, doing a little of this prep work once a week is also beneficial. So if you're chopping onions and garlics and other savories, chop a few extra and put them in a container in your refrigerator. They'll definitely last throughout the week, and then you can just go and use them as needed. Sweet onions won't last as long. Yellow onions have a long shelf life. You want to keep them away from potatoes. The gases they emit will cause both to decay more quickly. So if you have a cool, dry spot to keep your onions and your potatoes, you can buy them when you find them on sale. If you have any room to grow, you can also grow your onions from scraps. Cooking an onion will mellow the flavor, which if you're using a yellow onion is probably the taste palette that you're going for. You can spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on knives, but you don't need that. You need one decent chef's knife, and I actually found this knife, which is very beat up, on a camping trip that I took about 8 years ago, and it is ceramic, and it is one of my favorite knives. And if we go camping to this day or travel, that's the one that I'm packing to take along. Garlic is another one of those vegetables that will last a very long time. You want to keep it in a cool, dark, dry spot. And when you're selecting garlic, look for garlic that has some color in the skin. You don't want bleached garlic. If you want to store garlic for meals for the remainder of the week, you can use a little olive oil, put it in a jar, and add your garlic to that. It will preserve it, keeping it fresh. Now these items here are readily available and inexpensive year-round. You can always find green cabbage, onions, and garlic. But as we move forward, hopefully we will be learning how to take what is growing in season, preparing it, and preserving it. Here I have some mushrooms. I often use mushrooms as a placeholder for meat. I don't use a lot of artificial meat. Very rarely. I really prefer to have all natural vegetables. The fake meat tends to be filled with a lot of things that our bodies just don't really know what to do with it. Later I'll show you how to make a veggie burger. But for today's meal, we're going to chop up some mushroom and use that in the cabbage. Although my diet is plant-based, my husband still enjoys meat. He eats mostly fish and chicken, but occasionally he does eat red meat. And I had some leftover hamburgers from when we had company, so I took those and used them as the base for his cabbage rolls. So in mine you have the onions, the garlic, and the mushrooms. Allow this cabbage to cool before you try to handle it. It won't take long, just a few minutes sitting in the strainer. quite often in my dishes. One of the major benefits of beets is that it lowers blood pressure, and it does so very effectively. So if you tend to run on the low side, of blood pressure, you're going to want to eat those in moderation. I've recently ran into that with my husband. His blood pressure was running a little bit high. He's a type A personality for sure, and I am not. So I was eating right alongside him all the beets that he was eating, and my blood pressure runs low having a vegan diet, and it went very low. So always be aware that everything you consume has a medicinal effect. You're either eating for your health, or you're eating, to increase your health or to decrease your health. You want to support your health, and everybody's system is different. Here I'm taking some chickpeas and I'm adding those to my vegan cabbage rolls. A little bit of rice. Rice works as a binder and a filler. It's not a huge amount of nutritional value in rice, but it sure can help fill your family. Although we really want to keep an economical kitchen, there are some staples that are necessary just to be able to bring the most flavor to your family. Always keep an iodized sea salt in the pantry. You need that iodine unless you're eating a large amount of seaweed. Then the way you're going to be getting the iodine is through that sea salt. And iodized salt is a chemical cocktail, but iodized sea salt, you're getting the best of both worlds. When spices and herbs go on sale, make sure that you're taking advantage of those, because you can really bring a wide variety of flavors to your family if you have spices in your pantry. Very most important spice for me is smoked paprika. It brings a real savory flavor to almost any dish. So as we begin to assemble here, I want to talk a little bit about the cost of the meal. And where you are in the country is going to matter, I understand that, or where you are in the world. But I want you also to know that whatever ground meat that you have access to would work here, and whatever rice you have would work here. So the cabbage cost about $1.50. The rice cost about 50 cents. I buy the big bags of rice, so that serving of rice was about 50 cents, if that. This is a half a jar of pasta sauce, and that cost $4.50. So when you cut it in half, you're using about $2.25 of the pasta sauce. And here I have some vegetarian broth. Again, if you make your own, it's not going to cost you anything. I didn't have any made in the refrigerator, so I am using this to fill up the jar of pasta sauce. I always look for ones that aren't filled with a lot of extra sugars, and ones that are made from tomatoes and not just a tomato paste. So the assembly is always adding a little liquid to the bottom of your pan so that your cabbage does not stick. And then it's as simple as assembling a lasagna. Now the 4 portions is simply for the vegan cabbage roll. We're stretching our food dollars quite far. Really everything in here is already cooked. It's just going to bring it all together, marry the flavors. As these tutorials become more regular, we'll talk about meal planning for the week. Just a little more in depth, how to find the best bargains in your grocery store. All right, you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to speaking with you again.